Bob Tillotson, his son, and a group of their friends are snowmobiling in American Fort Canyon in the Utah backcountry.
There's hills we climb that are 1,500, 2,000 foot climbs, and that's a little bit dangerous but exhilarating.
They're off the main trail carving up a blanket of fresh powder. Then Bob's friend sees the snow on the mountainside directly above him start to slide.
And then he got on the radio and said, "Avalanche, avalanche."
Bob is in the direct path of the avalanche. He has no time to react to the warning call.
So that's the only thing I heard, literally right as it hit me.
A wave of snow swallows Bob and carries him down the mountain.
When it stopped, I was buried. I could not move the slightest inch. I was absolutely helpless.
I'm Tora Couture, and this is Tell Me What Happened, true stories of people helping people, an original podcast by OnStar. Every day when you wake up, you don't know if you'll be a person who needs help or if you'll be a person that helps someone else. It's important to remember that it's in all of us to be either one of those things, every day. Bob is in his 60s. He lives in Highland, Utah, with his wife and their 6 kids.
I'm in denial of my age. I'm just a pretty active guy, so when I look in the mirror and see all the gray hair, I don't recognize that guy. I think I'm still 20.
Bob's been riding snowmobiles since he was 5 years old.
When there's 3 feet of new powder and you're blowing through it on the sled and you're carving and you're floating and it's just an amazing feeling. Snow's coming up over your head. The snowmobile's completely disappeared. It's hard to describe that feeling, but it's amazing.
Bob started racing snowmobiles in the early 90s. In 1999, he won the World Championship Snowmobile Hill Climb. Bob's ridden all over the U.S., but Utah's American Fort Canyon, which is literally his backyard, is his favorite place to ride. The canyon is in the Wasatch Mountains, which is home to granite and limestone peaks, turquoise alpine lakes, and steep rock walls. It also has a reputation.
Most people that ride snowmobiles, they are scared of American Fort Canyon because they consider it kind of extreme terrain.
On January 13th, 2024, Bob headed out to American Fort Canyon with a crew of 8 riders. But before they hit the mountains, they checked the avalanche conditions.
To see what the avalanche danger is. And it was high. It was extreme. So we knew that we had to be careful and be safe and stay off the big hills.
They decided the safest destination would be a meadow below those big hills. Then they packed up their safety gear. Every person carries a 2-way radio, a shovel, and an avalanche beacon. An avalanche beacon is a safety device that transmits a signal that rescuers use to find someone buried in the snow.
Then we have what we call an avalanche backpack. Looks like a normal backpack, but it's got a lever. And if you get in an avalanche, it deploys a bag on your back and keeps you afloat. It keeps you more towards the surface.
The day started on a nicely groomed trail, but they were in search of fresh powder. So after 3 miles, they left the trail and started plotting their own path in the snow.
So the whole time we've been riding, we didn't see any signs of slides. The snow will slough off and, slide in a few places. We didn't see anything like that. So we felt like we were not in danger.
Slopes with an incline of roughly 30 degrees or higher are at risk of avalanche. The slope Bob and his crew were on was significantly less steep, so they weren't disturbing snow that is likely to cause an avalanche. Or so they thought. Reassured by the absence of slides, Bob and a friend started racing in deep snow.
We wanted to test our sleds. We wanted to see how far each one could go side by side,
That's when they realized they'd pushed it too far.
I didn't realize how possible it was to do what's called a remote trigger. What happens is as you're carving through the snow, it sends shock waves through the area.
Those shock waves were the remote trigger that set off the avalanche. One of Bob's friends was about 300 yards to the east. He saw the slide first and radioed to the rest of the group as fast as he could. But for Bob, it was already too late.
Next thing I know, it kind of picked the back of my sled up, and it was so violent, just being thrown end over end. I was engulfed in the snow. I could not get my hand over to my shoulder to deploy my Avalanche backpack.
Bob tumbled over and over, carried down the mountain with the wave of snow.
It seemed like forever. That's what I remember at that moment.
Finally, stillness. Bob tried to move.
When they say that snow sets up like concrete, that is so true. I could not move the slightest inch. I could not move anything. And then at that point, I realized how serious it was. And it was just very, very terrifying.
This is Tell Me What Happened, a podcast created by OnStar to showcase how important human connection is when you need help. Whether you're trapped in a flood, hurt in a car accident, or buried by an avalanche. Bob was hit by a wave of snow. He was tossed end over end and buried. 2 other people in his group were also hit by the avalanche. One deployed his avalanche backpack and was able to dig himself out. The other didn't have time to deploy his and was buried. Luckily, this friend was found and rescued pretty quickly. During the 2022-2023 winter season, nearly 1,200 avalanches were reported in Utah. So for people in the snowmobiling community, it's not uncommon to have seen or experienced an avalanche. But that wasn't the case for Dustin Sweeten before January 13th.
The interesting thing is, all the years I've been riding for 55 years, I have never been caught in an avalanche. I've never watched an avalanche happen, and I've never had to rescue anyone.
Like Bob, Dustin has a long history with snowmobiling.
My uncle actually was the first one to bring any snowmobiles into the state of Utah.
Dustin sells and collects snowmobiles. His collection includes over 400 vintage machines, which he displays at his own family-run snowmobile museum in Utah. But Dustin's favorite thing to do is ride them.
It's just liberating to go out and ride, especially on a beautiful day, just after it snowed and the sun's shining and everything. There aren't a lot of limits of where you can go. So there's a freedom to snowmobiling that there isn't in any other thing I've ever done.
The morning of January 13th, Dustin checked the snow conditions and saw the avalanche was extreme in almost every part of the state. But Dustin's been riding his whole life and has all the essential safety equipment, so he felt comfortable going out for a ride. Nowhere near the slopes. So Dustin, his 3 sons, and a few coworkers met early that morning and drove to American Fork Canyon, with plans to stay away from the steep stuff.
There'd been about 4 to 5 feet of new snow within the last 24 hours, and nobody had been over it. And so we were kind of breaking trail all the way up.
By 1 o'clock, Dustin was getting tired, so he radioed his group and told them it was time to head home.
As we came up over a hill, I looked at the steep slope that I'd instructed our guys not to ride earlier in the day because of the danger of avalanche. We knew it was dangerous. And I said, oh, it slid. I thought it was a natural slide because that happens.
Dustin was about to go home. Then his curiosity got the best of him.
So I was first turning away from it. I said, no, let's go check it out.
Dustin, his son Ammon, and another rider hop back on their snowmobiles and ride over to the slide.
I could see the avalanche where it had come down through the trees. And right then we saw 2 people standing there. We thought, uh-oh, somebody maybe was in this.
Dustin's son Ammon usually films his snowmobile excursions. He thought he'd turn the camera off when they were heading home, but he didn't. It was still running. So when they pulled up to the slide, he had no idea it was recording.
Are you guys good? Is anyone buried?
See the video, you hear him yelling at him, "Are you okay?" And they said, "We're okay, but we've got somebody buried uphill."
Guys, Avalanche, get up here now.
I yelled over the radio immediately to our group, "Get back here now, there's an avalanche."
Dustin, his son, and other members of the crew switched their beacons to search mode so they could locate the missing person.
Beacons on search! Beacons on search!
Dustin knew that time was running out.
When you're in an avalanche, it's extremely, extremely unusual for a second party to rescue an avalanche victim alive. They show up and find bodies, but the only chance you normally have of surviving is the group that is with you.
Their beacons picked up a reading right away, about 10 feet from where they'd stopped their snowmobiles. Then one of them saw movement in the snow.
And so he started immediately digging where he saw that, and he says, "I have a glove."
As I was down there, I had one hand extended out. I didn't know whether that was up or down or sideways. And I was eventually able to move my fingers just back and forth just a teeny bit.
The movement they saw in the snow, that was Bob. By this point, Bob had been buried for nearly 6 minutes. He was quickly running out of oxygen.
I'm definitely deep because of how compact the snow was around me. And so I just had to wait. I had to mentally calm myself down, stop fighting, try to breathe shallow. But I do remember feeling someone touch my hand.
On the surface, everyone jumped into action.
Shovels came out, and we just started digging frantically as fast as we could.
Got him! Come on, gotta get him out. Just get him out.
Underneath the snow, Bob's mind was racing.
I'm wondering, okay, who else was buried? Where's my son? Because my son was up there. I'm thinking about my family, the situation I might leave them in if I don't make it. That was heavy on my heart, and I just started praying for all I was worth. I just started praying. And the craziest thing is, and I know I was about to the end of my oxygen, but in that terrifying scenario, gradually it just came into a feeling of peace, which is the oddest thing to say, but I was actually at peace.
Above the snow, things are anything but peaceful. Members from both groups were frantically working to free Bob.
You got this! Hang on! Don't you dare fucking give up! Stay with us!
I remember when they got to my helmet, and I could feel them, brushing the snow away.
And so we're trying to clear out his face.
Dig around the helmet. Keep his nose clear. Keep his mouth clear, guys.
At this point, he was non-responsive. We've got to get him out of here as soon as we can. At this point, I thought, okay, we're going to have to give CPR, so we've got to clear his chest.
Finally, they were able to remove Bob's helmet. For the first time, Dustin and his crew could see his face. To their absolute shock, they recognized the man they were trying to save.
Dustin! This is Bob Tillotson, man.
Until this point, Dustin and his group were rescuing a stranger. Now they're trying to save a dear friend. Bob and Dustin have been friends for more than 30 years. They've gone riding, raced snowmobiles, and taken family trips together.
Once I realized I knew who this was, I'm thinking, okay, I can't be explaining to his wife that we almost saved your husband. We almost got him out of there alive. There's no way I can be going to his funeral this next week. There is no way we're losing him.
Dustin held Bob's head and started talking to him.
Bob, Dustin, you're okay. We got you. Just put your body up, okay? You got you. You're good. Your chest is out. You can breathe, right?
We were just getting his chest cleared away to start CPR, and he all of a sudden started breathing and came to.
By the time they cleared Bob's face, he'd been buried for nearly 12 minutes.
At that point, I was in shock. I was shaken. I was extremely cold, and I was in pain, but I owe him my life. If Dustin hadn't showed up, I don't think I'd have made it.
They freed Bob from the snow, built a fire to warm him up, and eventually got him home. Bob was extremely sore, but escaped without any serious injuries. When Dustin and his son got home, they realized they accidentally captured the entire rescue on video. Dustin texted Bob to ask him if he wanted to watch it.
And he said, I want to see it tonight.
Watching it was extremely intense, highly emotional. We had to turn it off a couple of times, kind of let me regain my composure. And it was quite interesting as I was watching it. I knew the outcome. I knew that I was rescued, but it was kind of like I was watching it in third person, and I kept thinking, you guys got to hurry. He is not going to make it.
Watching the rescue was also an intense experience for Dustin. It brought back painful memories. In 2005, Dustin had to cancel plans with a good friend to go snowmobiling. His friend went without him. Dustin warned him that the avalanche danger was high and to stay off the hills.
And that night I was coming back from where we were, and I got a phone call that he'd been killed in an avalanche. And so I've been second-guessing myself since. What if I had gone? Because I feel if I had been there, I'd have gotten him out. And so, I don't ever want to feel like that again. The feeling on this one is a lot better.
The next day, Bob visited Dustin.
And he walked around and hugged myself and my sons and just said, thank you, thank you, thank you. I think he might have, prior to this, thought he was invincible. And we've joked with him. He says, well, you have 9 lives and you've used up 8, so it's time to maybe slow down a little.
And that's kind of the challenge I have, is things that maybe should scare me didn't. Now I look at it a whole different light. Dustin and I, we've known each other for a long time. Personally, it means a lot to me that, that it was Dustin and the men that rescued me. I have so much to be thankful for.
It's amazing this turned out to be a friend, but it wouldn't matter if it was a friend or somebody I'd never met or never known. I would put just as much effort into getting them out of there as I would somebody I did know. It was just really a miracle that we were there and able to save somebody. And it's an even greater miracle that it was somebody that I knew and cared about,
After they watched the video, they posted it online.
He says, you know what? We need to get this out there. People need to learn from this.
Later that week, the story was picked up by several media outlets, and Bob went on national news to tell his story.
This thing's kind of gone viral. I've heard from friends I haven't talked to for 30, 40 years.
But this isn't really about me. This isn't really about Bob. This isn't really about our whole group or his whole group or anything like that. This is about, okay, if 1 or 2 people from this become safer and they don't get killed in an avalanche, wow, it was worth it.
Avalanches kill about 150 people worldwide every year. And while getting that number down to 0 might be wishful thinking, many of these deaths are preventable. Sandra Riches is the executive director for British Columbia AdventureSmart, an outdoor education program that teaches people about outdoor safety for all seasons. Sandra hasn't experienced an avalanche firsthand, but the threat of being buried in snow is something she knows all too well.
I remember the snow going in my mouth and in my nose and in my ears, and I know I wasn't that deep under the snow. I know for a fact, because I remember where I was skiing. But man, did it scare you know what out of me. It was really a time that made me think. And I was able to wiggle jiggle and blow the snow out of my mouth and shake my head and raise up to the surface on my own, but instantly frightened. instantly scared. You know, we talk a lot about preparation for those what ifs. It's hard to say, how do we prepare for those feelings, those emotions, that anxiety, that fear that we would feel?
Wow. Yeah, that would be some deep emotional prep. Before we get there, what are the things we can do to reduce the chances that we end up in a winter rescue scenario?
If you're heading into the backcountry terrain where it's unmanaged space, it's not on a groomed trail, it's not in a park where it's controlled with assessment or ski patrol or grooms, you're heading out there on your own. It's up to you to reach that destination safely, and that destination is home. And that comes with all that training, the gear, and the trip planning. What we phrase it as is the 3 T's: trip planning, training, taking the essentials. Bring out the guidebooks, look online and see where you're going to go, and plan it as a group. Plan it in relation to your skills and ability. Check in with everybody. You know, what are you capable of? The buddy system is a great little reminder to think about as well. So if we're heading out with 4 of us, we're each going to pair off with one other. What we add for winter is don't forget those season and sport-specific pieces of gear. I'm going to add extra pieces of gear for winter travel if I'm snowmobiling, snowshoeing, tossing on some microspikes and going for an awesome snowy hike with my friends.
In our story, our guest talked about avalanche safety gear. What should you be carrying if you're headed into an avalanche-prone area?
The extra pieces for winter backcountry travel would be an avalanche pack, an avalanche transceiver, an avalanche probe, and an avalanche shovel. Those are key. Those are going with you if you're heading out into the backcountry. And really check those forecasts so that everybody knows what's happening in the snowpack, what the weather's doing, how that will all work with all of you. So it's one big recipe.
When we think about avalanches, you know, even if we have our beacon and we have our shovel, can we predict when an avalanche would hit?
We can prepare, we can plan, and we can look up all of the hazards before we go out. So research at your local avalanche center. There's resources out there that are reliable, all based on science. And then they serve that information to us on a regular basis based on the storm cycles that are coming through. And they'll provide you with everything that you need to do.
What do you do if you're in an avalanche?
Having the confidence in our abilities to prevent it from happening is key. So we know that we have all of our gear on us. We have an avalanche pack on us as well that can inflate and hopefully bring us to the surface if we're caught in an avalanche. And we've practiced that. We've practiced pulling that cord at home and expanding the pack in the house. So we know we can do that confidently. It's just going through the processes as many times prior to anything happening and creating scenarios so that what if and when if it does happen, it's almost habitual to pull that cord. Aside from pulling the cord, activating your avalanche pack, swimming to the surface, moving around as much as possible. If you can, create an air pocket in front of your face, because everything's just going to suck around you and really pack in like cement. And then what comes into fruition here are the friends that you went out with and what their opportunity now is to help you get out of that snow. That's where that card falls over to them at that point, and your life is in their hands.
So what if you come across someone who's been buried in an avalanche? What should you do?
In an avalanche situation, it's up to you and your party to take care of that rescue. That self-rescue is key because the time it would take to communicate with tasking agencies, search and rescue, they come and find you. If anyone's buried, that time is too long. So it's up to us as a group to help our friend who might have been caught in that avalanche. Fingers crossed, you've taken the training before you've gone out into the backcountry. So you've taken an avalanche skills training. There's introductory courses. And based on your training, you're looking for signs of where I went into the avalanche. The entry point, if there's any gear that ended up coming to the surface, if it was a backpack, a helmet, if I'm skiing, might have been a ski or a ski pole. You can look for signs. And then they have to create a bit of a grid search, if you will, and then use those transceivers to really pinpoint a location where it's quick enough now to use the avalanche probe to probe into the snow to locate the subject buried. And once they identify that the subject's in that location between the transceivers and the probe, then they would use the avalanche shovels to shovel the snow away the way they were trained. And those areas that are for backcountry adventurers, we are those decision makers and rescuers, if you will. And it's up to us to be rescue ready, but really think about that prevention piece and how we need to prevent it from happening.
That's it for this episode of OnStar's Tell Me What Happened. True stories of people helping people. If you want to share your own story about a stranger who showed up for you at just the right moment, look for a link at onstar.com. Or if you're listening on Spotify, check out the Q&A feature. Let's share some love for people who help others in big ways and small. While you're at it, share some love for this podcast. It really helps if you review and rate us or share this with someone who would enjoy it. On behalf of OnStar, I'm Tora Couture. Please, be safe out there.